At 2:13 local time, the night over Bandar Abbas was still intact. The port cranes were motionless against the horizon. Cargo berths glimmered under sodium lights. On the black water beyond the harbor, the Persian Gulf looked calm enough to deceive satellites, tankers, and politicians alike. But inland, beyond the commercial facade and the glow of the coast road, a different landscape waited in silence. Dry ridgelines, hardened compounds, buried cable runs, radar outposts, and one command center that, in this fictional scenario, had become the brain of a regional crisis. Then the silence broke. Not with a dramatic explosion at first, but with a disappearance. Cameras lost feed. Outer sensors blinked out. Communications nodes began dropping one by one. And somewhere inside that command complex, men who had spent years preparing for airstrikes realized too late that this was not an airstrike. It was a seizure. The target sat outside Bandar Abbas for a reason. It had to be close enough to the coast to command the Strait of Hormuz, but far enough inland to survive the first minutes of any conventional attack. From there, the IRGC could oversee missile dispersal routes, naval harassment corridors, drone launch approvals, port security coordination, and emergency command continuity if the city itself came under pressure. In a crisis, that mattered more than any single battery or patrol boat. Bandar Abbas was not just another coastal city. It was the hinge between the Gulf and the wider Iranian military posture in the south. Whoever could command that hinge, even briefly, could alter shipping patterns, military signaling, oil prices, and the perception of control across the entire region. And perception was everything. In this fictional escalation, the Gulf had already entered the dangerous phase where routine military activity no longer looked routine. Tankers were being escorted. Foreign warships had closed distance to strategic lanes. Insurance rates for commercial shipping had climbed almost by the hour. Intelligence suggested IRGC naval detachments were repositioning fast attack craft, while mobile anti-ship systems were being fed from inland depots to secondary hides near the coast. More alarming still, signals traffic pointed toward a centralized command element outside Bandar Abbas coordinating multiple domains at once. Maritime disruption, missile readiness, drone surveillance, and electronic warfare. That convergence turned one fortified location into something larger than a headquarters. It became a switchboard for escalation. Iranian doctrine, in this scenario, rested on a powerful assumption that any major Western move would announce itself through familiar stages. Overflight, standoff strikes, naval shaping fires, public diplomatic rupture. Hours, maybe days, of warning before a real breach of the command network. But the reversal came in the exact place the defenders trusted most: timing. The attack did not build in a recognizable pattern. It arrived inside their decision cycle. By the time field officers began receiving fragmentary alerts about interference near peripheral sites, the force moving against them was already in position. The confidence that had protected the command center for years, its layered security, its hardened bunkers, its surrounding kill zones, its faith in distance from the shoreline, collapsed not because those defenses were weak, but because they were oriented toward the wrong form of war. This was not a punitive strike meant to destroy from afar. It was a raid designed to reach in, take hold of the command architecture, and tear out the one man whose capture would reverberate far beyond the battlefield. The spearhead, according to the title, was formed by U.S. Rangers and the 173rd Airborne Brigade. In this fictional telling, they were not acting as separate headline units, but as components inside a joint task force built for speed, vertical envelopment, and shock dominance. The Rangers were the cutting-edge, direct-action assault companies, target isolation teams, compound breach elements, and command node seizure forces. The 173rd Airborne provided scale, perimeter disruption, blocking positions, airfield and road denial, reinforcement control, and the manpower needed to hold a collapsing battlespace open just long enough for the core mission to conclude. Around them moved the unseen layers that make such a raid possible: aviation crews, ISR aircraft, cyber support, naval screening, electronic warfare cells, medevac teams, long-range fires coordination, and exploitation specialists waiting to turn captured rooms into captured intelligence. 8,000 men sounds like an invasion. In reality, for an operation of this fictional complexity, it functioned more like a distributed combat ecosystem. Only a fraction would ever see the walls of the command center. Others existed to blind radar, seal roads, suppress air defenses, block reserve units, control landing zones, secure maritime approaches, and maintain the fragile corridor between insertion and extraction. That was the genius and the terror of modern raid doctrine at scale. The decisive moment may happen in one bunker, one hallway, one office. But it is created by 1,000 synchronized acts occurring beyond sight. Preparation began long before the first helicopter lifted off. The command center outside Bandar Abbas had not been selected lightly. Weeks of surveillance in this fictional scenario built a living map of the complex. Satellite passes measured surface changes around disguised ventilation shafts. Thermal imagery exposed the parts of the compound active at irregular hours. Signals analysts studied routing patterns to determine which buildings were administrative shells and which housed hardened communications equipment below ground. Cyber teams tracked the pathways through which internal traffic reached military districts along the coast. Drones loitered beyond visual detection, watching vehicle habits, guard rotations, antenna maintenance windows, generator cycling, and the movement of command vehicles whose presence indicated when senior leadership was on site. Then the most important layer emerged: pattern of life around the commander himself. He was not just another official in uniform. In this fictional framework, he was the operational conductor of Southern IRGC crisis response, a senior figure who could authorize missile repositioning, redirect naval harassment, and coordinate decentralized retaliation if Bandar Abbas came under attack. He moved between protected structures inside the compound on an irregular schedule specifically designed to frustrate targeting. Some nights he slept elsewhere. Some evenings he lingered in a hardened coordination room until dawn. But intelligence narrowed the uncertainty. 3 separate streams: communications metadata, internal transportation patterns, and sudden security posture changes, converged on a high-confidence window. He would be present. The headquarters would be active. The command center would be thinking it was safe. The mission profile reflected that urgency. This was not a decapitation strike from altitude. It was a capture mission wrapped inside a larger assault. That changed everything. Precision fires could collapse the compound, but not if the objective was alive and retrievable. Air power could flatten outer defenses, but too much shock too early might push the target into a dead-end bunker or trigger internal scuttle procedures. The assault had to hit hard enough to paralyze, but not so destructively that the primary objective disappeared into the rubble. That required exquisite sequencing: cut the eyes, jam the nerves, isolate the limbs, then seize the brain intact. The approach through the final hour was almost beautiful in its restraint. High over the Gulf, intelligence platforms watched the coast through layers of darkness. Offshore, naval elements held their distances while electronic measures began probing the edges of Iranian awareness without crossing the threshold that would confirm attack. Inland, the terrain west and north of Bandar Abbas became the map on which time was written. Dry riverbeds, low ridges, industrial access roads, unfinished lots, storage yards, and desert margins all offered routes to move, hide, or block. Helicopters came in low, their flight paths bent by terrain masking and timing gaps between expected surveillance sweeps. Fixed-wing support stayed outside immediate visibility, orbiting like patient predators. On the ground, prepositioned sensors and remote assets fed the assault force a final pulse of confirmation. Outer checkpoints remained occupied. Internal traffic matched the expected rhythm. The commander was still inside. Then the first phase began, not with thunder, but with subtraction. Cameras on the perimeter went dark in sequence. Microwave relays degraded. 2 radar-linked security nodes fed false returns back into the compound network, showing activity where there was none and normality where there was danger. Field telephones in one support building spiked with static. At a nearby barracks, guards received a maintenance fault warning that pulled attention away from the western approach at exactly the wrong moment. To the men watching their systems fail, it looked at first like a technical disturbance. To the force closing in, it was the opening of a seam. Ranger assault elements hit the outer ring fast and without spectacle. Security towers were neutralized before coherent alarms could spread. Breach teams split by axis, one toward the primary administrative face of the compound, another toward subterranean access points identified through weeks of overhead analysis. The first shots, where they were heard at all, were short and clinical. Suppressors in the dark. Then explosive breaches. Then the sound changed. Concrete corridors amplified gunfire into rolling pressure. Windows burst outward. Sirens woke up too late. Within moments, The outer confidence of the garrison gave way to the inner panic of men discovering the fight was already in their hallways. At the same time, the 173rd Airborne descended into the wider battlespace with the purpose of a closing fist. In this fictional raid, their role was decisive not because they were storming the command bunker itself, but because they were shaping the entire geography around it. Blocking detachments cut roads leading toward the compound from nearby support zones. Key intersections were seized or cratered. Reserve movement corridors were denied. Quick reaction elements that might have counterattacked were fixed in place by sudden contact on multiple approaches and by the confusion of incomplete information. To Iranian units farther out, the battlefield no longer made sense. Reports came in of a raid, then an airborne landing, then sabotage near communications nodes, then convoy destruction on an eastern route. There was no single picture to trust. Inside the compound, the assault became intimate. A hardened command center is designed to survive blast and fragmentation. It is not designed to remain calm when multiple doors disappear within seconds. Rangers forced entry into the upper command structures while specialized teams drove toward the protected sections below. Hallways were cleared in ruthless rhythm. Rooms were skipped or secured based on preloaded intelligence priorities. Doors marked for communications personnel, technical archives, and command access received immediate attention. Everyone else became part of the chaos behind the assault wave. Some defenders fought. Some fled deeper inside. Others froze at the sight of an attack they had spent careers imagining would never arrive in this form. The first major discovery came in a lower operations chamber. Instead of a single command room, the complex contained a tiered control architecture, maritime surveillance feeds, missile dispersal updates, drone reconnaissance sectors, and coastal response channels routed through interconnected rooms below the main building footprint. This was not merely a local headquarters. It was a campaign nerve center designed to preserve continuity under bombardment. Banked displays still glowed. Emergency power had kicked in. Digital maps of the strait and surrounding approaches were open on multiple consoles. Officers were attempting to redirect subordinate units as the seizure unfolded above them. Some tried to purge files. Others transmitted incomplete warnings to units that could hear but not understand. Then came the confirmation that changed the tempo from assault to historic rupture. The target was inside. He had moved into an inner protected suite with a reduced personal security element and had not yet been evacuated, likely because the attack's opening phases severed the command chain so quickly that no one could clearly distinguish intrusion from systems collapse until the intruders were already underground. That hesitation was catastrophic. A ranger element pinned the outer corridor. Another breached the adjacent chamber. Flash and concussion turned the suite into a storm of dust and splintered light. The security detail was overwhelmed in seconds. The commander, stunned but alive, was physically secured before self-destruction procedures, deadman signaling, or relocation could be completed. In this fictional narrative, the capture happened not with cinematic speeches or final defiance, but with confusion, force, and a hood pulled tight under red emergency lights. Outside, however, the compound was not yet won. IRGC reinforcements began probing toward the target from multiple directions, some organized, some desperate. Vehicles moved without central coordination. Sporadic heavy fire broke out from support buildings not fully cleared in the initial breach. A secondary bunker section, believed at first to be non-essential, revealed itself as a communications redundancy node and became the focus of a brutal internal fight. This was the explosive middle of the raid, the point where even a well-planned operation risks widening into something harder to control. But the raid's timing discipline held. Airborne blocking forces kept the outer battle space fractured. Overhead ISR fed updates faster than the defenders could reposition. Direct fires and selective supporting strikes broke concentrations before they could unify. Then the compound started yielding more than a prisoner. It started yielding its secrets. Exploitation teams moved immediately behind the assault line, ripping drives, seizing encrypted modules, photographing boards, collecting authentication materials, and identifying key infrastructure. They found contingency routing plans for missile units along the southern littoral. They found emergency communication trees linking the command center to naval harassment cells, drone launch detachments, and dispersed coastal surveillance posts. In a secured technical room, they uncovered storage racks containing specialized communications gear and what appeared to be pre-planned escalation packages. prepared command instructions meant to activate during sudden conflict in the strait. One section of the bunker held hardened records on port disruption options, shipping surveillance priorities, and maritime choke point timing windows. Another contained evidence of redundancy tunnels extending farther than analysts had estimated. That last discovery nearly changed the entire ending, because a deeper section of the complex suggested the possibility of escape routes, hidden personnel spaces, or even last-ditch demolition chambers. For a few tense minutes, the raid entered its most dangerous emotional register. Not the fury of breach and capture, but the cold uncertainty that follows success too early. Had the target been truly secured? Were there more commanders below? Was the structure rigged for collapse? It is in these moments, more than in firefights, that elite forces reveal their professionalism. They do not accelerate blindly. They tighten. They verify. They move with less noise and more suspicion. In this fictional account, that discipline prevented the task force from overcommitting into dead space while still allowing demolition and denial measures to be prepared against the portions of the facility deemed too dangerous or unnecessary to hold. The decisive climax came at minute 41. By then, the primary target was secured, the main control architecture had been seized or smashed, and Iranian efforts to organize a coherent counterassault had failed. That created a narrow final window to finish what the operation had begun. Charges were placed on key communications trunks, data rooms, tunnel intersections, and hardened choke points essential to restoring command functionality. Selected surface structures were marked for destruction. A coordinated sequence of detonations followed, not a chaotic flattening, but a surgical collapse of the command center's ability to function as a regional hub. Support buildings burned. Vent shafts belched smoke from deeper compartments. Antenna arrays folded into sparks and debris. By the time the final demolition wave hit, the compound no longer resembled a protected brain. It looked like a decapitated machine. And then the force left. A raid succeeds not when it reaches the target, but when it gets out with the mission intact. Extraction began under layered control. Rangers withdrew by phased elements, passing custody of secured sectors just long enough to preserve a clean exit route. The prisoner was moved through a tightly protected corridor from the bunker complex to the exfil package with almost ritual precision. Medical check, restraint check, identification confirmation, transfer confirmation, movement. Around that central act, the battlefield was already being folded shut. The 173rd thinned its blocking posture by priority, disengaging from positions only after higher-risk avenues were sealed with fires, obstacles, or demolition. Aviation lifted what had to be lifted. Ground corridors carried what could move faster unseen. Every second after minute 47 increased escalation risk, and every commander in the raid understood it. When the last major assault elements broke contact, the compound behind them was still burning. From a distance, it might have looked like the aftermath of a bombardment. Up close, the truth was far more humiliating for the defenders. This was not a site obliterated from the safety of altitude. It was a command center entered, fought through, stripped, broken, and abandoned by the men who had controlled it. The most damaging part of the raid was not the shattered infrastructure. It was the proof of vulnerability. The proof that a protected leadership node outside one of Iran's most strategically critical cities could be isolated and penetrated in under an hour. The proof that the commander at its center could be taken alive. That fact alone would send shockwaves far beyond Bandar Abbas. Inside Iran, the internal consequences would be immediate and merciless. Counterintelligence purges. Security reviews. Command reshuffles. Emergency dispersal of officers from known facilities. Accusations between military branches. Silence from some officials, theatrical certainty from others. But beneath all of it would be a far more corrosive emotion: doubt. Doubt in hardening. Doubt in early warning. Doubt in the premise that strategic depth near the Gulf guaranteed safety. A captured commander is more than a battlefield loss. It is a breach of prestige, doctrine, and political theater all at once. Across the region, the geopolitical aftershocks would begin before sunrise finished touching the water. Gulf monarchies would quietly recalculate what was possible in a crisis. Commercial shipping firms would study the event as both reassurance and warning. Reassurance that hostile command systems could be disrupted. Warning that the region had entered a phase where covert precision and overt escalation could become indistinguishable. Washington, in this fictional scenario, might reveal almost nothing publicly about the mechanics, preferring ambiguity over celebration. Allies would ask different questions in private. What else was mapped? What else was reachable? How many more command nodes had suddenly become suspect in the minds of their own occupants? And still, even after a raid that dramatic, nothing would be settled cleanly. The Strait of Hormuz would remain what it has always been: narrow, vital, and vulnerable to men who understand how global systems can be pressured from local ground. One command center destroyed, one commander captured, one night of extraordinary violence. None of that erases geography. Retaliation would remain possible. Proxy forces would stir. Missiles not yet fired would disperse deeper. Speeches would be written in capitals across the world, each trying to domesticate an event that, in truth, resisted easy political ownership. Military success in such a place does not end tension. It rearranges it. That is what gives operations like this their mythic edge. Not the pyrotechnics. Not the headlines. The compression. 47 minutes in which doctrine, terrain, intelligence, aviation, violence, and nerve all converge so tightly that entire strategic assumptions can collapse before dawn. 1 hour earlier, the command center outside Bandar Abbas was a protected symbol of continuity. 1 hour later, it was smoke, broken concrete, dead screens, and absence at the top. For the men who carried it out, the memory would be more tactile than grand. Rotor wash hitting dust at the landing zone. The metallic taste of a bunker fight. The flicker of emergency lights over shattered corridors. The sudden weight of success when the target is no longer hypothetical but zip-tied, breathing, and moving under guard through a structure still echoing with gunfire. Raids live forever in geopolitics because they reduce abstraction to touch. Theories of deterrence become doors. Regional command networks become hallways. A crisis becomes a man in custody. By daylight, analysts would start counting material losses, destroyed infrastructure, compromised systems, seized data, dead personnel. But the deeper loss would not fit on a battlefield diagram. It would live in the minds of commanders now staring at their own maps differently. Every hardened site near the coast would feel less permanent. Every protected tunnel would seem more discoverable. Every quiet headquarters outside a strategic city would now carry a new, corrosive question. If they could reach Bandar Abbas, what exactly is out of reach? And that is where the story turns ominous. Because the most dangerous consequence of a successful raid is not triumph. It is revelation. Revelation changes planning on every side. It teaches one military what it can do, and teaches the other what it can no longer assume. From that point on, every lighted compound near the Gulf becomes a reminder. Every convoy of senior officers becomes a gamble. Every night watch at every gate becomes a little less certain that concrete and distance are enough. So when the smoke thinned over the ridgelines outside Bandar Abbas, the city itself would still be there. The port would still function. Ships would still move through the narrow waters to the east. Dawn would spill over cranes, highways, warehouses, and mountains as if history had not just lurched forward in the dark. But somewhere beyond the visible skyline, a command center would be hollowed out, its authority physically removed, its confidence demolished in under 50 minutes. And that is the enduring image of this fictional operation. Not merely force, but violation of certainty. A night in which a fortress did not fall from afar, but was entered. A command chain not simply disrupted, but grabbed by the throat. A senior architect of escalation not killed in legend, but captured in confusion. In military history, those moments never stay local. They spread through doctrine, through diplomacy, through fear. Because once a state learns that its hidden rooms are reachable, the walls may still stand, but they never feel the same again.